I want to begin this conversation with complete honesty because I know the title of this video is going to speak directly to a very specific place inside your heart. It is going to reach the part of you that is still carrying hope, the part of you that quietly wonders if there is something you could say differently, something you could do better, or some version of yourself you could become that would finally make the avoidant person in your life stop creating distance and allow themselves to fully receive the love that is being offered to them. And I understand that feeling more than you may realize. I understand the part of you that keeps searching for answers, the part that replays conversations, analyzes moments of closeness and distance, and wonders what happened between the moments where everything felt connected and the moments where they suddenly seemed unreachable. When someone you deeply care about has a pattern of moving toward you and then pulling away, your mind naturally begins searching for a solution. You start looking for the missing piece. You wonder if there is a certain message you could send, a certain way you could communicate, or a specific behavior that would finally make them feel safe enough to stop running. You begin thinking, maybe if I become more patient, they will open up. Maybe if I show them enough love, they will understand that I am not here to hurt them. Maybe if I become exactly what they need, they will finally choose me without hesitation. And I want you to know that this desire comes from a very human place. It comes from wanting connection. It comes from caring about someone and wanting to understand them instead of simply walking away. There is nothing unusual about wanting to find a bridge between you and someone who struggles with emotional closeness. But I also want to be clear about something important. This conversation is not going to be a guide about manipulating an avoidant person into loving you. This is not about learning psychological tricks, playing mind games, or discovering some hidden weakness that you can use to gain their attention. Because the truth is, trying to control someone's feelings will never create the kind of love you are actually looking for. What I have seen many times is that when people try to force their way into an avoidant person's heart by constantly proving their value or trying to trigger their ego, they often end up losing pieces of themselves. They become emotionally exhausted. They start questioning their own worth. They become focused on getting a reaction instead of building a healthy connection. They spend so much energy trying to convince someone else that they are lovable that they forget the most important person who needs that love and attention, themselves. And you deserve more than a technique. You deserve more than a strategy designed to make someone chase you. You deserve understanding. You deserve truth. You deserve a connection where love does not require you to constantly perform, prove, or compete for someone's emotional availability. So today, I want to talk about something much deeper. I want to talk about why the thing that affects an avoidant person most deeply is not something you can fake. It is not something you can pretend to have for a few days. It is not something you can create just because you want a certain outcome. The thing that creates the strongest impact is your genuine sense of self, because the avoidant ego is often built around a very specific internal belief system. It is connected to the idea that they are the person who needs the least. They are the person who can handle things alone. They are the person who remains calm while others become overwhelmed by emotions. They often see themselves as the one who has control, the one who can step back when things become intense, the one who can walk away if necessary and still continue functioning. This does not always mean they do not feel deeply. In fact, many avoidant people experience emotions very intensely. The difference is that they have learned to manage those emotions through distance, independence, and emotional self-protection. Their identity can become connected to being the person who does not need too much from anyone else. They may believe that needing someone makes them vulnerable. They may believe that depending on another person creates risk. They may believe that emotional independence is proof of strength, and from their perspective, this independence may not feel like a defense mechanism. It may not feel like something created because of fear. It may genuinely feel like a part of who they are. It can feel like their personality, their strength, their way of surviving and navigating relationships. But throughout their relationship history, this belief is often reinforced by the patterns that naturally develop around them. And this is not because other people are doing something wrong. When someone becomes distant, the natural human response is usually to move closer. When someone pulls away, we often try to repair the connection. We communicate more, we explain ourselves more, we show more affection, we try to create reassurance. We do this because we believe love, patience, and understanding can create safety. And sometimes they can. But when this becomes a repeated pattern, something else can happen. The more one person reaches, and the more the other person withdraws, the stronger the existing dynamic becomes. The avoidant person begins to feel confirmed in the role they already know. They become the person who needs less. They become the person who appears calmer. They become the person who seems more emotionally controlled. Meanwhile, the person pursuing them unintentionally reinforces this belief by showing that they are the one trying harder, waiting longer, and searching for more reassurance. The avoidant person may begin to think, I am the independent one. I am the one who can handle distance. I am the one who does not need this connection as much. Again, this does not mean they do not care. It does not automatically mean their feelings are absent. It means the dynamic between two people can sometimes strengthen the very patterns that make closeness difficult. And this is why constantly trying to win an avoidant person usually creates the opposite result of what you desire. The more you chase their attention, the more you attempt to prove your importance, and the more you try to convince them that you are worthy of being loved, the easier it becomes for them to remain comfortable in their familiar position, because they are still experiencing you through the same emotional pattern they understand. But something changes when you stop trying to convince someone of your value and start living from the understanding that your value already exists. The most powerful shift is not making them realize you are special. The most powerful shift is becoming someone who already knows they are special, someone who can love deeply without losing themselves, someone who can care about another person without making that person responsible for their happiness, someone who can desire connection without abandoning their own emotional stability. That kind of presence creates a completely different experience, because an avoidant person is used to seeing people react to their distance. They are used to people becoming anxious, trying harder, or needing reassurance when they create space. But when they encounter someone who remains loving while also remaining grounded, it challenges the story they have always believed. They are no longer seeing someone who is trying to fill an emptiness through them. They are seeing someone who is whole, someone who chooses love, but does not depend on another person to define their worth, someone who can stand beside them without chasing them. And that kind of energy cannot be created through a temporary performance. You cannot pretend to be secure forever if you are secretly trying to control an outcome. You cannot imitate self-respect while secretly abandoning yourself for someone else's approval. True emotional strength comes from within. It comes from healing your relationship with yourself. It comes from knowing that you are worthy whether someone chooses you today, tomorrow, or never. And that is exactly why this type of presence can have such a powerful effect on someone who has spent much of their life protecting themselves through distance. Because for the first time, they are not being asked to carry someone else's emotional survival. They are simply being invited into a connection with someone who is already standing firmly within themselves. And that is the kind of connection that has the potential to transform both people. The person who constantly explains themselves, sends long messages, and tries to make their feelings understood can unintentionally strengthen the avoidant's existing belief that they are the one who has more emotional control. The person who keeps waiting, hoping, and staying available, no matter how much distance is created, can accidentally reinforce the idea that the avoidant is valuable enough to be pursued without needing to change anything. So the question becomes, what actually reaches the avoidant ego? What moves beyond that protective identity and touches something deeper and more authentic? The answer is this: becoming someone the avoidant cannot easily define or place into one of their familiar categories. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because this is where much of the advice surrounding avoidant attachment often misses the point. A lot of conversations focus only on external behavior. They focus on what you should text, what you should stop doing, how long you should wait, what words you should use, or what actions will create a certain reaction. And while behavior does matter, behavior is usually the result of something deeper happening internally. The most powerful changes are not created by simply changing your actions. They come from changing the emotional foundation behind those actions, because an avoidant person often has an internal system for understanding people. It is almost like a mental filing cabinet that has been built over years of relationships, experiences, disappointments, and emotional patterns. This system helps them quickly understand where someone fits and how they should respond. This internal system is shaped by their attachment patterns and the way they have learned to protect themselves emotionally. Most people can be placed into one of these familiar categories relatively quickly. There is the person who needs constant reassurance, the person who becomes overwhelmed by distance, the person who wants more closeness than the avoidant knows how to provide, That person may feel predictable because the avoidant already understands the dynamic. Then there is the person who is emotionally distant in the same way they are. Someone who avoids vulnerability, keeps walls up, and creates a relationship where both people remain protected but disconnected. There is also the person who is kind, loving, and emotionally available, but still follows patterns that the avoidant recognizes. Someone whose reactions become predictable. Someone who becomes anxious when distance appears. Someone who reaches when the avoidant retreats. The avoidant has seen these dynamics before. They understand these roles. They know where they stand within those patterns. But what truly disrupts their internal system is encountering someone who combines qualities they have rarely, if ever, experienced together in one person. Someone who is emotionally deep but not emotionally dependent. Someone who loves fully but does not lose themselves in love. Someone who can be warm, caring, and open while still remaining completely connected to their own identity. Someone who can look at the avoidant and see everything clearly, the fears, the defenses, the emotional walls, and even the parts of themselves they struggle to accept, but does not become overwhelmed by what they see. They do not judge them, they do not run from them, but they also do not take responsibility for repairing them. They do not see the avoidant as a project. They do not believe their love alone can heal every wound. They simply see the person in front of them with compassion while still maintaining their own emotional balance. That combination is something the avoidant often does not know how to process, because many people they encounter fall into one extreme or the other. They either become consumed by the connection and lose themselves, or they remain distant and emotionally unavailable in return. But someone who can remain deeply loving while also remaining deeply grounded creates a completely different experience. This person is fully present, but not at the cost of their own peace. They are available, but they are not endlessly waiting. They care, but they do not abandon themselves. They choose the relationship, but they do not need the relationship to prove their worth. And this is what makes them difficult for the avoidant ego to categorize, because the usual emotional hierarchy begins to collapse. The avoidant's familiar belief system often works like this. The person who needs less has more power. The person who can walk away holds more control. The person who remains unaffected appears stronger. But when they encounter someone who does not seem desperate for their attention, yet is still more emotionally open, more compassionate and more present than anyone they have known before, that old system no longer works. The avoidant cannot place themselves above this person in the same way, because this person is not chasing them. They are not trying to convince them. They are not asking them to complete something that feels missing inside themselves. Instead, they are standing there as a whole person who simply wants to share a connection, and that can be deeply confusing for someone who has spent years protecting themselves through emotional distance. Because suddenly the avoidant is faced with a person who reflects a kind of strength they understand, but may not have developed themselves. A person who has independence without emotional isolation. A person who has vulnerability without losing power. A person who has love without fear of losing themselves. And when the avoidant encounters something they cannot easily explain, something that does not fit into their previous experiences, their ego often does not become louder, it becomes quieter. The need to maintain control starts to weaken. The instinct to categorize, predict, and protect begins to slow down, because for once, they are not interacting with someone who confirms their old beliefs. They are encountering someone who challenges them, someone who shows them that emotional closeness does not always mean losing freedom, someone who proves that vulnerability does not always lead to pain, someone who demonstrates that love can exist without dependence, pressure, or emotional chaos. And that is where the deepest impact happens, not through manipulation, not through pretending not to care, not through playing games, but through becoming someone who is secure enough to love while still belonging completely to themselves. That is the presence the avoidant cannot easily dismiss, because it does not trigger their defenses in the same way. It reaches something underneath the defenses, something more human, something real. And in that moment of silence, when the ego becomes less defensive and less focused on maintaining control, something underneath begins to awaken, something much older, much deeper, and much more honest than the protective identity they have built over time. But there is something I need you to understand with absolute clarity. What I have been describing is not something you can simply act out. It is not a role you can step into for a few weeks because you want a certain person to react differently. It is not a strategy where you pretend to be detached, pretend not to care, or pretend that you are completely unaffected by their actions. Because the avoidant person is often extremely sensitive to emotional inconsistency and hidden motives. Their entire way of navigating relationships has often been built around observing, analyzing, and sensing what is happening beneath the surface. They have learned to pay attention to subtle changes in people's behavior. They notice when someone's words do not match their energy. They notice when someone says they are okay, but their actions reveal something different. They notice when confidence is being performed instead of genuinely felt. And this is why trying to manufacture emotional independence usually does not work. An avoidant person may sense the difference between someone who has truly found inner stability and someone who is simply trying to appear unaffected. They can often feel the pressure behind the performance. They can sense when someone is pretending not to care while secretly hoping for a specific reaction. They can recognize when someone is creating distance as a tactic rather than because they genuinely feel secure within themselves. And sometimes trying to become someone you are not can actually create more emotional tension than simply showing up honestly from the beginning. The truth is, the only version of this kind of presence that has real power is the authentic version. The version that comes from your own healing. The version that comes from facing your own fears, understanding your own patterns, and processing the pain you have experienced in this connection instead of allowing that pain to define you. It comes from looking honestly at what this relationship has brought up inside you. The moments of rejection, the uncertainty, the waiting, the confusion, the desire to be chosen. And instead of allowing those experiences to make you smaller, you use them as opportunities to become more connected to yourself. Not perfect, not completely healed in every possible way. Not someone who never feels sadness, longing, or disappointment. But someone who has developed a genuine sense of inner steadiness. Someone who can feel deeply without being controlled by every emotion. Someone who can love another person while still remaining loyal to themselves. That is the difference between pretending to be secure and actually becoming secure. The real secret to touching an avoidant person's ego is not really a secret at all. It is becoming so fully yourself that their usual patterns no longer have the same effect. It is becoming so grounded in your own identity that you are no longer trying to earn your place in someone else's life. It is becoming so comfortable with who you are that you do not need to convince anyone of your value. There is a quiet power in someone who knows themselves, someone who does not need to chase to feel chosen, someone who does not need to prove they are lovable, someone who can offer love freely but can also walk away from situations that require them to abandon their own emotional needs. That kind of person creates a completely different experience for an avoidant because there is nothing for their ego to compete against. There is no insecurity to control. There is no emotional chaos to escape from. There is no pressure forcing them into a role they are uncomfortable playing. Instead, they encounter someone who is simply present. Someone who is open but not desperate. Someone who cares but does not cling. Someone who sees them clearly but does not lose themselves trying to be seen by them. And that kind of wholeness is what truly changes the dynamic. Not because it forces the avoidant to come closer. Not because it guarantees that they will suddenly overcome every fear they have carried for years. But because it removes the emotional imbalance that often keeps the relationship trapped in the same cycle. You are no longer standing there asking, how can I become enough so they finally choose me? You begin standing in a different place. A place where the question becomes, am I choosing a connection that honors who I am? And that shift changes everything. Because true emotional security is not created for someone else's approval. It is created because you deserve to feel at home within yourself. And the most beautiful, yet sometimes difficult truth is that this wholeness is not something you build to attract the avoidant. You build it because your own life deserves that foundation. If your growth, your confidence, and your inner peace inspire them to come closer, that is wonderful. If they recognize the difference and become willing to meet you in a healthier place, that can create something meaningful. But if they do not, you still have gained something that no person can take away from you. You have built yourself. You have created a relationship with your own heart that does not collapse when someone else becomes uncertain. You have developed a foundation strong enough to hold both love and loss, and that is the only truth worth remembering. The goal was never to become unforgettable to someone else. The goal was to become someone you never abandon again.